Do you ever wonder if it's too late for you? Is it too late to go back to school and get that degree? Is it too late to change careers or jobs? Is it too late to travel around the world and see some of the places that are on your bucket list? Is it too late to lose weight, get in shape, lift weights? The list is endless. And what I find working with women, in particular women over 50 who have already transitioned through menopause, is that they often come to me initially wondering if it's too late to make a change. Now, if you know me, you've listened to my podcast, followed me on social media, you probably know how I will answer this question. But I want to dive deeper today and I want to talk about finding your purpose, the steps that you can take to find purpose, fulfill purpose, or perhaps you already feel you know what that purpose is and you want to dig deeper into it. Today's episode is definitely going to be one that you want to listen to and maybe even take a few notes. Hi, my name is Carol Covino, and I'm the host of the Forever Fit with Carol Covino podcast. I'm a health, fitness, and nutrition coach for women who are transitioning through menopause and beyond. I help them to lose weight, body fat, and to tone and strengthen their bodies. Let's dive into the show. So, this subject came about because I'm writing a book, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that book, what led me to write it, and how you can be a part of my launch team if this is something that interests you. So, do stay tuned for those details. Finding purpose. I often talk about this with my clients in my social media posts and community. It is something that I believe firmly in. The reason being is that when we hit midlife, and that number kind of has been bumped a little bit, we now consider midlife 50. We may or may not live to be 100 years old, but that's kind of the mark within our minds that we think of as midlife. And we think of that transition as women as occurring in and around those menopausal years as we move from perimenopause, which are the years leading up to menopause, where we have all of those hormonal fluctuations and ups and downs, and we transition into menopause. And this is what we typically refer to as midlife. Now, being 61, I'm a little bit beyond midlife. You never know. I don't know about living to be 122 years, but probably at this point, with what we know, isn't going to happen. But I still, it's funny, consider myself as being in the middle of life. I did not get a handle on my purpose until I began to approach the age of 50, and even more so as I moved through my 50s. And it's ever evolving and changing as I've moved into my 60s. Finding your purpose, typically for midlife women, has to do with living out something that maybe you've always dreamed about, or it's been in the back of your mind, but you've been too busy. Many times, women, especially in their 40s, they're still in the workforce. They're still raising children, a family. Some might even be working two jobs. They're extremely busy. And I remember when I was in those years, I was not considering whether or not I was living my purpose. I would think about it from time to time, and then I would say to myself, I'll get back to that when I have time to catch my breath and think about this. I was aware that at that time, my purpose was being a mom and raising these three beautiful children. And there's nothing wrong with that purpose. That was my purpose at that point in time. But when my children got older and they began to leave the nest, graduate from high school, leave the nest, I realized that I needed to search a little bit further for fulfillment and purpose and tap into some things that I hadn't thought about for many, many years. And that's what I want to discuss today. You are never too old, and it's never too late to look into your life's purpose. Even if you're 80 years old and you're suffering with your health, but there's some kind of purpose that you feel you can fulfill, whether it's to be a mentor to another woman, a younger woman, or to your children or grandchildren, whether it's to perhaps help with a ministry or some type of volunteer work if you're well enough and healthy enough to do that. Perhaps it's to donate and help with a more indirect way. My point here is that even if you're older, even if perhaps you're limited, you can still find ways to fulfill your purpose or to fulfill a purpose within your heart. So I do believe it's not too late. And if you're a woman who's approaching 50 or you've crossed that threshold and you've gone beyond it like me and you're in your 60s or beyond, it is definitely not too late to learn something new. When my father was living with us the last years of his life, he came to live with my family, and I was in my mid 40s at the time. And he contracted two different types of cancer, the second one being a very deadly cancer that really overtook his body. But as I watched him in the final months, weeks, and days of his life, he continued to find purpose within his days. He continued to find spiritual purpose despite knowing that his time on this earth was limited and despite not feeling strong enough or having the energy to do certain things. And what he would do, he really enjoyed studying and he enjoyed learning more about the scriptures in the Bible. So he began to watch a program that would be aired, I think it was like Monday through Friday in the morning at 10 a.m., and it was a deep Bible study. And he would take out his Bible, he would take out his notepad, and he would go through all of these verses, all of the study, and he'd even come share with me things that he'd learned and things he was excited about. He was still excited about what he was learning. So he was finding time for a purpose that perhaps he had not been able to fulfill, a more spiritual purpose within his life when he was younger, healthy, building houses, designing homes, and very busy with his career. He now had this quiet time cleared. And I don't tell you this to go down a route that might sound a little bit depressing or sad. I tell you this because I want you to see that there is time. There is time to fulfill certain things within your life. I'm going to share with you a book as we move through this episode of the podcast that I think you're going to find helpful, relevant, and thought-provoking on this very subject about these windows of time that we have in various parts of our life. And certain things might close off to us because of health or mobility issues, but we can always find a way to tap into that purpose. So how do we find a purpose? How do we know if we have a purpose? You first have to look at your regrets. And that may sound very funny, but I recently listened to a very good podcast, and I would tell the woman's name, but I just kind of ran across it and I cannot remember. But she was talking about how regrets don't have to be this big downer, and that she will sometimes ask her clients that she works with, or actually patients, she's in therapy, she'll say, do you have regrets? And if they say no, she knows they're not being truthful with themselves because we all have them. So take a moment, think of a couple of regrets. I know I have them. And as women, I think men actually do better with closing the door and getting that closure on certain regrets. I feel like women pick them up again and again and again. I know I've been guilty about it. I'll pray about something, talk about it with God, feel good, and then I'll pick it back up a few days later and start reminiscing over it and ruminating and going over the details and feeling bad about a decision I made or something I said or did in the past. And that is simply useless. So, what can we do with those regrets? We have to reframe them and we have to begin to look at the lessons inside of them, and not in a negative, shaming way like, oh, I did something wrong, so I've got to learn the lesson. It's in a way where we can take that information and use it to help ourselves or help others. So, looking back on perhaps a relationship that went sour, you have regrets about that, finding the lessons, finding what you can take away, finding more of a positive outlook. Perhaps it's something you've done. Perhaps it's something you didn't do or an opportunity you passed up. If it's an opportunity you passed up, for example, maybe it's learning that thinking things over too much and trying to have every single thing lined out before you start something new doesn't always work. Think about having kids. You could sit and think about every scenario. You could take child development classes. Nothing will prepare you for taking home that baby and beginning to raise that individual, that daughter or son. You can't sit and think about it forever and expect that everything is going to go well because you've thought about everything that can go wrong and what you can do. Life doesn't work that way. I see people do it before they start health programs or fitness and nutrition programs. I've often had them tell me that they're worried about the timing. They're commuting to a job, they're doing some travel for a job, or perhaps they have a lot of travel planned just for pleasure, and they will put off the health and nutrition program because they're waiting for a better time. It's like putting off having kids because you're waiting for a better time. And then maybe that opportunity passes. So maybe that opportunity to do that program or sign up for that event, it leaves, it's gone, it's not there anymore. And you maybe regret that. I've done that where I think about something almost too much, going down the avenue of the money and the time and all of the things, and then the opportunity is passed. So that might be a regret, and the way to reframe that would be to see the lesson from that. Not that you need to jump into everything that you think about doing or that comes across your way, but to take action. Perhaps you're a person that struggles to make a decision and take action. So looking back on some of those regrets can help you identify that. Number 2 is clear the clutter. Clear the clutter. We have to clear space physically, mentally, spiritually, in every area of our life. So starting with our physical space, I don't know about you, everybody's different here. My middle child, this is not important to her and it might change at some point, but she lives in clutter and she's constantly losing things and forgetting that she even had something and finding it a year later because it's buried in the clutter. It's hard to function when you can't find things, locate things. It's hard to function in clutter. It's going to sound silly, but one of the first things my husband and I do when we get to a hotel room when we're traveling is we organize our clothing. Even if it's a 2-night stay, even if it's a 1-night stay, we will hang things up and put them in the drawers, put the suitcases aside, and keep the room somewhat clear of that clutter so that we can move and find things easily. I'll unpack my toiletries and have them all set, ready to go, just like I would at home. Now, to some people, that might seem silly, a waste of time. No, I'll live out of my suitcase. But for me and the way my mind works, I don't function in clutter. I start to get irritated. I forget things, and it actually slows me down time-wise and productivity-wise. So for instance, if we're going out to dinner and I want it the full face of makeup and the hair done, it's going to take me 4 times as long if it's all in my suitcase or scattered. So I need to clear the clutter. At home, it's the same way. Walk into the closet, can't find anything because of the clutter. Or the junk drawers, suddenly there's something you feel like you need that you know you put in the junk drawer 2 years ago and you can't find it. This is the clutter. So starting to clear some of that can actually feel very good, very cleansing. Even if it's not your thing to declutter, I would urge you to take some time to pick one part of your physical space, whether it's your bedroom, your kitchen, your closets, your office, one part of your physical space, and just kind of put that in order. Just one part. We have to clear the clutter in our mind. What is holding us back from fulfilling our purpose? Are we doubting ourselves? Are we having imposter syndrome? And I'm going to tell you a really strong story of imposter syndrome in just a moment. But we must get rid of those thoughts that are what I call limiting self-beliefs. They're little stories that loop it around in our head that oftentimes are not even true. They're not based in any fact. They're based on our perception of something that happened long ago. And so we have this negative connotation associated with this thing or associated with ourselves that is not true. I recently had a client tell me, Carol, I'm good at starting things. I'm not good at finishing them. So that's a limiting self-belief. It may have been true, she fulfilled that, but by saying that out loud, you're reinforcing that. You're making sure that that's a part of how you respond to a weight loss program or an exercise program or starting a new degree or job or career change. If you always say, I start, but then I stop. Last night I was in a Bible study at the church with my husband called SALT, really good one. And it's to learn how to be a leader, how to step into leadership. And he was talking, the instructor was talking how this is the very first class. Everybody's excited. It's the start of the year. But he said, be careful because people start things, and we as Americans are really guilty of this. We start things and we don't finish them. And that's so true. And he urged us, even if we missed lessons, even if we felt we didn't have time, to just continue to take action and show up, to take that messy action. So we've got to clear out those limiting self-beliefs. Then we need to clear the clutter from our body. What could that be? What could clutter be in our body? Perhaps it's excess sugar that is causing us to feel poorly, because sugar can do that in excess. It can affect our brain, our body, our ability to lose weight. Perhaps it's something like an excessive amount of white bread or gluten, and you're walking around with a stomach ache and digestive issues because of this gluten that you're not digesting. Or perhaps it's a dairy sensitivity, and dairy in the US from cow's milk is not your grandma's cows on the farm and can have a lot of consequences on our body, especially with the hormones and additives and such. So perhaps it's clearing out some of the food, some of the things that we're eating that might be making us feel bad, might be causing us to gain body fat, making it difficult for us to lose weight. Perhaps it is organizing, and I know this is a physical space, but I just thought of it just now. It crosses over into the mindset as well, is clearing out the physical space of your workout area. So if you work out at home, and you're not working out because you're getting distracted, or it's not a nice space and everything's in the middle of the living room. Perhaps it's taking a corner of your apartment or one small room of your house or one small corner of a living room and clearing out that workout space so that your mind is clear right along with it. Maybe it's getting rid of one of those limiting self-beliefs about exercise. It hurts. I don't like it. I start and then I stop. Start to reframe the regrets, but also start to reframe your mindset, your belief system along with it. And finally, number 3 is hone in on health. Hone in on health. So I want you to zero in on what you can do with your health. And of course, there's a lot of crossover with these 3. We're reframing regrets and limiting self-beliefs, which helps our mindset and helps us to clear the clutter so that we can set the stage for better health. Perhaps clearing the clutter through nutrition is setting the stage so we can be in better health. Health is important because if we're entering midlife, if we're entering our 50s, going through menopause, and we're not paying attention to our health, this is the time that declines begin to happen. And I was talking with my husband last night, and this is not a judgment because I did this exact same thing. When I hit my early 50s, there was this little bit of denial. I knew my body was changing. I knew my kids were starting to grow up and leaving the house soon. I knew I was making a transition to a different part of my life, but I was in denial about it. I kept feeling like I was still 45, and there's nothing wrong with feeling 45, but I was feeling 45 in the sense of being in denial and not understanding the way my body was changing. I was in denial about that. And so sometimes it's hard to reach women in their early 50s and make them understand that they do need to address the health, that you can't keep doing certain things without certain consequences happening. So, for instance, a good example of this is the blood glucose roller coaster. As we hit perimenopause, the years leading into menopause, you may or may not be aware that you begin to have problems regulating blood sugar, blood glucose levels. As a result of this, you can, over time, this takes time, become insulin resistant, where your body ceases to recognize insulin. Insulin's not able to clear out the excess blood glucose. And many women wind up on medications. Many people wind up on medications. When we hit menopause, this blood glucose regulation becomes even more profound. And we may be shocked one day when we have that blood test done or that lab work done that those blood glucose levels are much higher than they should be. If we are having blood glucose issues, we're putting our brain health at risk and our overall health, such as our cardiovascular health, at risk. We could become type 2 diabetic, begin to have coronary heart disease, problems such as stroke, and they've linked these high blood glucose levels have been linked most recently to Alzheimer's. The research is not conclusive at this point, but that is what is being thought to be a major player in Alzheimer's, are blood glucose levels. Now, time changes things, research changes things, so always keep an open mind, but at the very least, it's affecting your health. So if we continue on this roller coaster and we don't do certain things, such as lift weights, so that we can increase our insulin sensitivity in the muscles, or we don't have enough protein to support lifting weight and the growth and synthesis of muscle, or we're having too many refined carbohydrates and ultra-processed food, we eventually are affecting our health over time. We're not going to feel like fulfilling our purpose. Because I've talked to women that are struggling with type 2 diabetes. when you're not feeling well, you're having fatigue, or maybe it's autoimmune, it's awfully hard to step into your power as a midlife woman, to step into your role as being a mentor for women coming up behind you. It's hard to tap into your purpose if you feel lousy and your health is poor. Yeah, you can still do it, but it's not the same as entering midlife from a state where you are doing everything you can for that hormonal balance responsible for insulin and your glucose levels. If you're not sleeping well, that's another example. You you're not having the energy that you need to get things done, to find your mojo, to get excited about learning something new or excited about starting something new. So I'm going to talk a bit about this book and then my story of imposter syndrome that I think will help you. So the book that I suggest that you read or take a look at is written by Bill Perkins. Bill Perkins is one of the world's most successful hedge fund managers and entrepreneurs, very successful man. And he is the author of the bestseller, Die with Zero. Die with Zero. So that's a heck of a title. He was recently interviewed on Dr. Peter Attia's podcast, which is called The Drive. Highly, highly recommend that podcast. And there's a whole episode on this book. So basically, Bill Perkins has a philosophy which challenges societal views concerning time, wealth, or your money, and how it collides with health. So those three things are the pillars: time, wealth, and health. So he believes we should try to reach maximum net fulfillment, which I'll explain in a moment, rather than net worth. So what are we taught to do? Save, save, save for those years where we're retired and elderly. What he's arguing in this book is to take advantage of certain windows of time to do things that you might not be able to do when you're older. We knew a couple at our church, and not the current one, but one we used to go to when the kids were very, very young. So this has probably been about 20 years ago. And this couple was so excited to buy this RV. This gentleman had worked his entire life, worked himself to the bone. And they were finally going to live out their dream of getting in this RV and traveling across the country. They never had a chance. The week before he was due to leave, I believe it was, he had a stroke and he never recovered and he eventually passed away. She sold the RV at a time where it was a terrible time to sell an RV. I think she was trying to do it in 2008. Or actually, it was prior to that because I was in my 40s. But I remember economically, the gas prices were high and it wasn't the best time to be selling the RV. So not only was she not getting to use it, she was having to sell it at a major loss. So my point to this story is that they waited to live out this dream when perhaps they should have carved out some time, spent some money, and done this expedition when they were at a point where they had their health and could feasibly do it. Now, of course, he didn't know he was going to have a stroke, but he had been having some health problems leading up to this, and they were elderly, and she was somewhat frail. So they had waited to a point where they couldn't really feasibly enjoy the trip to its fullest, even if they'd been able to take it. And I've seen this on cruises that I've been on. Most recently, my husband and I went to Europe, and I saw people who had waited, and many of them were in very poor health, and they weren't able to climb the steps to some of the ruins and do some of the more physical things and get into areas. There was one area where we went underground, these narrow steps. They weren't able to do these things because they didn't have the physical strength and the mobility to do it. So, what Bill Perkins, is that taking advantage of those windows of time. Maybe you can't take off a year and go around the country in your RV because you work, but perhaps you can take a couple of weeks or 3 weeks and do this. He says, spend the money, take the trip, do the thing when you're in that window of time. If you have a dream of hiking a certain mountain, you're not going to wait and do that when you're 80, hopefully. You're going to do that within that window of time. Now, this is not to say you can't be healthy in your 70s and 80s. It's not to say that you can't be mobile, climbing stairs, playing with your grandkids, but there will be certain things that might go off the table. Hopefully, we can continue to travel well into our years, but realistically, we do have to think, will I have that opportunity? So, although it might sound reckless, die with zero, he's basically saying don't save all that money for the end. Invest in things that give you fulfillment. Invest in your family, your friends, your community. And if you're thinking about giving to a charity, don't wait to the end of your life to give all of it. Give a little along the way. So I thought there was really some wisdom in this. I'm not sure I agreed with every single thing that he said, but it really got me thinking about windows of time. What do I want to be doing in my 60s? Not putting things off, thinking it's going to be there tomorrow. So I wanted to share that with you. So I've recently finished writing my book, Finding Purpose in the Pause, Your Guide to Thriving in Menopause and Beyond. It is a book written for women transitioning through midlife, perimenopause, and menopause, but it is also for younger women who would like to know more about this journey. It is for the husbands, the partners that maybe want to understand their wife or girlfriend better and really understand what she's going through. So I believe there's something in here for everyone. And I tell part of my story. I get very vulnerable in the beginning, and I talk a bit about my childhood to the extent that I can, and share with you how that came back to me in midlife. So there were certain things that had happened in the past, and it seemed like it came full circle when my kids began to graduate from high school. So in particular, my early 50s, about from 50 to 53, I experienced this. My daughter, my oldest daughter, graduated, moved out of the house. Very difficult when that first one moved out. I cried. Then my second daughter graduated from high school, and then my son was right behind her and had made a commitment to join the Navy when he got out of high school. So I knew they were all flying out of the nest, and as they should. My husband and I had raised them to be independent. We did not want children that did not know how to provide for themselves and how to be resourceful. We wanted them to be resilient, and they are, and we're very happy with that. But what it did was it created a space that wasn't there prior. Remember me talking about being super busy in my 40s, and I would think about finding purpose, and then boom, it was gone. I was too busy running kids around. So my purpose is being fulfilled in writing this book. When I was in the first grade, and now I told this story on my social media, Facebook and Instagram, so if you've heard it, I apologize, and you may have heard me touch on it on the podcast before, but I feel it's important for you, not so much for me, but for you, because you may have something similar in your past. So when I was in first grade, I really had an unhappy home life. And I had a habit of looking out the window and daydreaming when I was in school. My chair was rather close to the window, and I would create this whole imaginary world. And it was my way of kind of relieving that stress that was happening in the home. As a consequence, I wasn't learning the other things that the kids were learning. So I wasn't learning to read and write because I was too busy daydreaming. The teacher that I had, her name was Mrs. Mason. She was elderly. To me, she looked 100 years old. I don't know, she was probably in her 60s, and I thought she was 100 years old. And she was crotchety and grouchy and mad all the time and would hit the kids. That's when you could hit kids. It was the 1960s. And she just seemed disappointed in life, or at least how her life had turned out. But my impression of her was an angry woman. So she decided I was mentally challenged, and she had me placed in a classroom with mentally challenged students. Now, they did test me, if you're wondering that. They did some sorts of test. But I was so scared and so checked out at that point that I wasn't really cooperating with the test. And I wasn't doing it to because I was mad or because I was being naughty. I was doing it because I was literally just terrified. So they tested me to some degree and decided I belonged in this classroom. So they put me in the classroom with the mentally challenged children. I was so devastated because I knew I didn't belong there, but at the same time, a part of me believed that I didn't have the intelligence, that I didn't have the resources to be in the regular classroom with the other kids. I don't recall exactly how long I was in there, but there was a teacher that came in, and her name was Miss Garcia, and she was young and pretty, and she always had a full face of makeup and false eyelashes and lipstick and tight mini skirts and high heels, and I was fascinated with her. And the other teachers despised her. You could just see the disdain on their faces. And they would talk about her when she left the room. She was the one to sit down with me. She quickly realized I didn't belong in the classroom. She taught me to read and to begin to write. Well, I took off pretty soon. I was reading at, it was a fifth grade level, and then eventually it was a middle school level, and I was reading at a high school level pretty early on in elementary school. And by the time I was, say, 10 years old, I would prefer to go to the section with the teen books or even adult books at that point. So I was placed back in the regular classroom, and I still to this day love her so much because I feel like she rescued me. But this is the problem. I developed a limiting self-belief. I believed that I was dumb. I said this to myself, you're dumb. So even when I went on to get 2 college degrees and I had a 4.0 GPA, honor roll, president's honor roll, I would say to myself in my head, wow, you've got everybody fooled. I didn't believe that I had been smart enough to go through the programs, get the degrees, and get the grades I did. Somehow I felt like an imposter. Somehow I believed I didn't deserve that and I wasn't very smart. For a long time, I felt like I was hiding how dumb I was. And I know that that sounds absurd, but I carried this with me for almost 50 years before I realized where these thoughts were coming from. I had gotten so used to entertaining them that I had forgotten where they came from. And that's when I went back and realized my limiting self-belief about my ability, at least my intellectual ability, had started there. In addition, there was shame. Mrs. Mason shamed me and was extremely ugly. I don't remember exactly what was said, but she was not kind. And so there was shame with being placed in that classroom. I was teased. I was made fun of. I was pointed at. There was a lot of shame. So that shame is something you can carry with you all the way through your life. So then when you do have a regret, you lapse into shame rather than seeing the lesson with the regret or the mistake or the choice you made, which may or may not have been wrong. It's just you made a choice in the moment with the information you had, but you look back and go, oh my goodness, that was the wrong choice. That was the wrong job. That was the wrong career. That was the wrong financial decision. I lost money. But at the time, you made a decision. So you have regrets. But you might look back on that with shame. And I realized that that was my tendency, to feel dumb and to feel shameful. And I know that sounds harsh, but I share it with you because I am challenging you to reframe those regrets. And I'm challenging you to clear out the clutter in your mind so that you can achieve mental and physical health. When I say hone in on the health, I am talking about more than physical health. I am talking about the health of our mind, our mental health. How healthy are our thoughts? How nourishing are our thoughts? I know women that won't put a bad thing, quote unquote bad, ultra refined food such as a burger from a fast food joint. They won't put that in their body, but they will let thoughts into their mind that are destructive, that eat away at everything good and eat away at your possibility to live your purpose. So the reason I wrote my book was really because I'd had a dream to write a book my entire life. Now, I believed my books would be fiction because this dream started as a child, and that's what I read. I read fiction, not nonfiction, as a child. But when I was 7 years old, I would take my crayons, I would make books, cut out things, paste, draw, color, and then I'd put it together with yarn, and I would sit at a little stand at the corner of Mulder Street where I lived and sell the books. I forget, for like, I don't know, 5 cents or 10 cents or pennies, whatever it was. I remember the mailman buying them from me. And I would say to my parents, I'm going to write a book. Now, I was shot down around every corner as far as that dream went, and basically told that it was pie in the sky. It wasn't realistic. You can't make money doing that. And only famous people get published, and all these sorts of things. So over the years, I set it aside. I would talk about it with my husband, then I would set it aside, and he would say, one day you're going to write the book. One day you're going to write the book. And about a year ago, I just said it's time. So I started last April, and I started with the subject that I talk the most about, which is transitioning into menopause. And I cover it all in there. I cover nutrition. I cover exercise, the best way to exercise. I have a section on intermittent fasting. I talk about the role of sleep, supplements, stress, and I touch on past trauma, dealing with past trauma, which will often rear its head as women are going into midlife. It can be a huge part of why they're not achieving the body they want or losing the weight they want. I see this quite a bit. So starting to examine some of those things and finding your purpose. And I would absolutely love two things from you before we wrap up. Number one is if you could join my launch team, and I will have a link in the show notes. If you have trouble finding this link for whatever reason, just message me on Instagram at Carol Covino Fitness. That's at Carol Covino Fitness, and I'm happy to send you the link. You're not going to get a bunch of spam. You will receive notifications of what is happening with the book. And so far, I am finished. I'm done with the editing process. It is a finished product. It was professionally edited. I am now in the design, the book cover, and format stage, and it should launch in April, maybe May, but we're aiming for April if all goes well. You know, there's always things that can hold up a book. So there are going to be 3 ways you can participate. As we move closer, I will explain those 3 ways. But basically, there is a way that everyone can participate. Even if you're short on time, I'm going to have, options for you. So don't worry about that. Go ahead, join that list, and trust me, you will not receive a bunch of spam. I protect that email list, and I don't want to lose the trust of my followers, so never worry about that. And I will send you information as it rolls out on the book. And again, it's going to be Finding Purpose in the Pause, your guide to thriving in menopause and beyond. So that is the first thing I would love for you to do. The second thing is I would love for you to tell me if you currently have a purpose for this second and better half of life, or you're in the process of finding your purpose. And what is it? Share it. I would love to know, because there's so many different ways. There's so many different things we can do, whether it's volunteer work or ministry or write a book or start a podcast or start a new business or become a health coach or whatever it is that you thought you couldn't do. Share that and share it with other people. Many times, if we share our purpose with other people, I did this with my book because it's part of my purpose. My purpose is helping women in this part of life who are nearing 50 and beyond to age well, to live well. So the book is part of that. Maybe you have a book in you. So I hope you enjoyed this podcast. There were a few things I wanted to touch on that I didn't get to, and I made a note of. And one was a realization of something I did in 2022 that I'm not doing in 2023. And it's actually an example of reframing a regret. And I've made a note. I'm going to share it in the future when it fits into the podcast topic. Be sure you're subscribed. I've got some great guests coming up. I took a little bit of break from interviewing. My son is flying in tonight from Japan. He is serving in the Navy. He is an air traffic controller on board the USS Reagan. He has been out on three tours of duty, I believe, but he is home on leave for a couple of weeks. I'm picking him up tonight. I cleared my schedule so I would not be in a lot of Zoom meetings or doing podcast interviews during that 2-week time. So there's a little bit of break, but I do have some fantastic guests coming up in the future. So stay tuned, subscribe, and in the meantime, fulfill that purpose wherever you are in the world. I wish you every blessing. Bye-bye.